background in the fashion industry in the United States, I mean, how do you see the influence of dandyism or secular culture and how it's been articulated within fashion today?
I would say, well, first of all, I just want to address some of the things Chantrell said, and I loved what you just said about dressing as an act of rebellion, right? So, you know, when you think about, and also what you said about blackness not being a monolith, because when you think about the way that, the lens in which a lot of people might receive this exhibit, they will think, okay, so we're talking about the diaspora and black men wearing suits all over the world. And I think it's actually more layered and complex than that, right? So there's a difference between the Sapiers and the, you know, folks who are doing it in South Africa, right? You have to contextualize where they are. And the diaspora is, you know, rooted in kind of, from an aesthetic perspective, it's rooted in a lot of similarities, right? So Africans, this is why you can photograph black people all over the world wearing suits and see it initially as a monolith, because you're like, okay, so there's brothers from Brazil to Moscow doing the same thing and trying to be, you know, dapper, but there's some traditions that African people have that are rooted in spirituality, right? In this context, it's you know, the Black church, for example, right? So Sunday's Best is kind of where that stems from on this side. But I think that, you know, in terms of the way it's been interpreted in the fashion industry in America, it's complicated because this is the way that black folks around the globe are interpreting Western fashion into their particular story. So it's kind of a call and response. It's not just a one-way, you know, interpretation.
Erica, do you think that those like specific movements of immigration or diaspora, I think, resonated within culture or fashion traditions in the United States? I mean, do you see that?
Again, I think it's more about how African aesthetic has resonated in the West, right? Because, you know, when I talk about context, so the Swankas in South Africa, their context is very different than the Sapiers, right? Because they're not, as Chantrell said, they're not, you know, going after kind of these high street fashion designers to adorn themselves and kind of, you know, make claims on luxury. That's a very different thing than what the Sapiers are doing. But what's, I think, the thread in terms of what Africans do to Western suiting is we Africanize it, right? So there's color, you know, like that's African. That's an African trait, you know. I'm from Chicago, and I have to like consciously try to not match because I grew up, you know, Chicago is Mississippi up north, essentially. So, you know, everyone is very matchy-matchy. You have your green shoes, you have your green purse, you have your green, and so that is an African aesthetic thing that's rooted deeply within us, right? And then you also have accessorizing or over-accessorizing. As is the case, let's say, with the Sapiers. You see, if you look at the work here, specifically with the Sapiers, you see that brother with the glasses, you see scarves, you see canes, you see, you know, kilts. So we do it till it's done, you know? And that's the difference, I think, between, you know, how we insert ourselves into like this Western fashion. I mean, at the end of the day, like when you think about runway fashion in the Americas, and before there was woolly wear, before there was, you know, Patrick Kelly, before there was Stephen Burrows, who were coming and splashing everything with, you know, all this color and bringing these black models to sachet and basically waking up the fashion world. You know, we've always had this kind of imprint, these signposts in what I think African aesthetic looks like in fashion. So.